There's a little-known part of Hollywood that most people are not aware of, known as the Audience Test Preview. The recently released book, Audienceology, reveals this for the first time. Our podcast series, Don't Kill the Messenger, brings this book to life, taking a peek behind the curtain. And now, join author and entertainment research expert, Kevin Goetz.
Oprah Winfrey says my guest today is a different kind of spiritual teacher for our times. Variety magazine lists him as one of the top 10 producers to watch. Ryan Seacrest describes him as a self-help master. And Ebony magazine has included him on the list of top 100 influential African Americans in America. Listeners, today I have with me veteran studio executive, film and TV producer, best-selling author, and motivational speaker, DeVon Franklin. He's the driving force of the successful inspirational films Breakthrough, Miracles from Heaven, and Flamin Hot, as well as the BET series Kingdom Business. He's done so many other movies, which we're going to talk about today. And so, DeVon, I am so happy to have you here, my friend. Welcome.
Glad to be here too, my brother. Thank you so much. Truly appreciate it.
Well, you're a blessing.
Oh, thank you.
I have to say to our listeners, not only all of those monikers, but also a supreme gentleman. I remember us having lunch. I don't know. We just had lunch a couple months ago, but this was like maybe, 5-7 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. Our first time having lunch.
Was it our first time?
I think so.
Okay. So we were at Hanoki and the Bird.
Yes.
And we had a wonderful lunch. And a couple days later, in the mail is a handwritten note from you to me saying, I so enjoyed our lunch. And I was like, who is this guy? Because I actually thought I was the only person who still writes handwritten notes. So we share that.
Yes, it's important. It was good. You had done so many of my films, but we had never really gotten a chance to connect. So I wanted to just say, hey, man, that was great. Thank you.
I want to start back because there is a leitmotif that runs through DeVon Franklin, and it's one of spirituality. It's one of grace. It's one of the values that you and I share of that making people feel a certain way, making people feel really good about themselves and acknowledging and living in gratitude. And we've shared those conversations. But I do want to find out, where did that come from? What was your upbringing that led you to such a positive place?
Yeah, that's a great question. It probably came from, first and foremost, my mother. My mother raised me and my older brother, younger brother. I'm the middle of three boys. Raised us in the Bay Area, Northern California. And from the time I can remember, she always had us in church. She always had us learning our memory verses, our scripture verses when we were younger.
You're a Seventh-day Adventist.
I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, yes.
I was involved very closely with Desmond Doss.
Oh, yeah, Hacksaw Ridge.
On Hacksaw Ridge and the whole origin of that, which we could talk about in a minute.
Yes.
That is how I got familiar with that denomination. And so you went every Sunday? Is that
every Saturday?
That's one of the differences of a Seventh-day
Yes, so it's a Christian denomination that observes Sabbath. And so I was raised observing Sabbath. So
which is, as you and I talked about, because I've invited you over to my house for Shabbat dinner, and you're saying you understand it differently than many other Christians.
Totally, because I practiced it every week. Friday night sundown and Saturday night sundown.
And what was church like for you?
Church was great. We would go to church Sabbath morning. So similar to, when Jews go to synagogue, it's like Saturday morning. That's when our church service was. But instead of doing our Shabbat dinner Friday night, we would do it Sabbath after church. So that would be our time to come together either as a church. We would do fellowship dinner downstairs at the church I grew up in, or we would go over to one of my family members' house and have dinner there.
And I think you had an uncle who is a preacher, right?
Yeah. My uncle, Dr. DJ Williams, who passed away a few years ago, started the church that I grew up in. He started that when I was 9 years old.
And was he mom or dad's brother?
He was my mother's
sister's husband.
Aunt's. So my mother's aunt.
Oh, so your great aunt.
Yeah, great aunt's husband. There you go. Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, because I remember from our last lunch, you told me, weren't there like 7?
Yes, there was. Yes. My grandmother had 7 sisters and 1 brother, and 6 of them are still living.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because you were on your way to dinner that night.
Yes.
It was your birthday, I think. For a birthday dinner. And you said she was going to make me this and this and this.
Yes,
and I was like, I could smell those scents, emanating. I used to say when we would visit my grandmother in Brooklyn, and if you went on a Friday for Shabbat, the entire building emanated with this wafting of scent of roast chicken and chicken soup and all of those Jewish foods.
Yeah.
And I bet you felt the same way.
Oh, without a doubt.
What were some of your favorites?
Well, see, growing up, the Adventist religion preaches a lot about vegetarianism. So a lot of times growing up, even though we weren't necessarily raised as vegetarian, there was always different vegetarian dishes that my grandmother and my great aunts would cook that we would love.
Well, that's why you look the way you look. So,
maybe a little bit.
Okay, so we're not on camera, but let me just say he's a stud.
Oh, anyway.
He is.
You're too kind. You're too kind.
Such a good-looking guy. I think you are just so great on every level.
Thank you.
It's a little bit of a man crush, but no need to be concerned.
Not at all. It's all
friendship outweighs it all. So, DeVon, talk to me about the kind of influence, the values that were given to you that will inform the man that was to come.
Sure. A lot of it was discipline-based. My mother having this chart on the refrigerator of me and my brothers and the chores that we were supposed to do, and we would get a star if we did them. So it was like discipline, make your bed, vacuum, clean the house.
And she essentially raised you as a single mom because your father died very young.
He did. And even when he was alive, he was still in and out of our house. He was an alcoholic, struggled with alcoholism for most of my entire life. So she did raise us as a single parent. And she instilled a lot of discipline. You got to go to school. You got to look clean. You got to do well at school. You got to be polite. If we were out of line, trust me, she would get us in line quick. And that was the foundation of discipline and doing your best and looking your best and doing well in school and being polite, saying thank you, saying you're welcome, saying ma'am, saying mister. Those were all the things
That's the foundation. How do you end up becoming a preacher?
Well, that was organic.
As a child actor and someone who lived it and believed it was in my blood, I can understand it. But explain it to our listeners more so, please.
Yes, so my father died when I was 9. And the same year, my great uncle, Dr. DJ Williams, started the ministry that we ended up growing up in. I spent my adolescence in, which was called Wings of Love.
Also Seventh-day Adventist?
Well, it wasn't technically Seventh-day Adventist because it was an independent ministry, but it still had a lot of the tenets of Seventh-day Adventism. So technically, because it wasn't a part of the official denomination, it couldn't be called Seventh-day Adventist. So we were a Sabbath-keeping church. But pretty much, if you went to one Adventist church and you went to Wings of Love, there were a lot of similarities.
So you could be a preacher without having a congregation.
You can. Yeah, you can.
Did you ever have a congregation?
No, because when I was 15 going to Wings of Love, it was the second year that we were doing our Youth Day. And Youth Day was a service where the youth would basically run the entire service. And so they asked me to preach for that service. And because I was already involved with the youth, I said, okay, so I did it. And people just responded. They were like, oh, this is great. And you got to keep preaching. And you have the gift of ministry and you have the gift of preaching. And I'm like, I hear you, but I'm going to Hollywood. Like, I want to make movies.
Okay, well, that was a left turn. How do you go from that to I'm going to Hollywood?
Because I was always fascinated by entertainment. Always. I think even when my father died, entertainment just was therapy. Watching movies and watching.
What was your first movie that had an influence on you?
Oh, man, like Color Purple.
Oh, my God. That Steven Spielberg version, right?
Yes, Steven. Oh, man, that's one of his best films ever.
And you know what's amazing is I read that book. I loved that book.
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh, they're going to ruin it. Then when I heard Steven Spielberg was going to do it, I said, well, he's certainly not going to ruin it. And then he actually was as good as the book, which are very powerful words.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, so powerful. So, I mean, that movie, and I can watch it
Whoopi
right
Goldberg
now.
And Margaret Avery.
Oprah. I mean, unbelievable. Danny Glover.
That was a tremendous movie. So Color Purple was an influence. What else?
Yes, Rocky 1, 2, 3, 4.
I believe you also have talked publicly about really admiring Sylvester Stallone.
Oh my goodness, just that story of Rocky.
How he got it made, you mean?
Yeah. No, that's inspirational, but just Rocky in of itself. I mean, feeling like he was, just going back to the first one, feeling that he was a bum, but he still had this dream of being this heavyweight contender. And when you go back and watch that first film, it's amazing. Like, he's like, listen, I don't even need to win. I just want to go the distance to prove to myself that I am something. And I just resonated with that as a middle child and trying to find my place in the world and not always
I'm a
feeling.
middle child also.
Okay, so you understand.
I understand
You know.
all too well.
You do.
So let me ask you then, was USC, which is where you went to film school, correct?
Yeah. No, I did a business major and a film minor.
Yeah, your mother would never let you do a film major.
Well, they rejected me. That was the thing. USC Film School rejected me as an undergrad major.
Note to USC Film School, you make mistakes. But you ended up doing a minor in film.
Yes, I did.
But you went to Hollywood, meaning you went to SC at first?
Yes.
Because you wanted and had the love of film? Wanting to direct, write,
No,
produce?
Produce was always the goal.
Oh.
Was always the vision.
Did you even know what a producer did at that point?
Yeah. I mean, because I did a lot of research on the movies I liked, who was producing what, how it kind of all worked. So when I went to USC, even though I got rejected from the film school as a major, I still went ahead and figured I needed to be in LA. So I accepted admission at USC, became a business major, film minor. But then that freshman year, I got an internship working for the company that managed Will Smith and Jada and Jennifer Lopez and so many great talent.
Overbrook.
No, it was actually the company that preceded Overbrook. It was a company called Handprint Entertainment that was run by Benny Medina and James Lasseter and Peter Golden.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then eventually David Gallard went there and Al Honorado. I mean, it was
wow.
Yeah,
so that preceded it.
That preceded it. Yes. Handprint actually gave birth to Overbrook.
And then Overbrook was formed with James Lasseter and Will Smith.
Correct.
Tell me about your experience at Overbrook, because that really did inform a lot for you.
Yeah.
And they actually made you a junior executive, didn't they, at a school?
No. Well, yes and no. So
okay, tell me.
When I was interning for them, so I interned for Handprint freshman and sophomore year. And then in my junior year, Will and James started Overbrook. And so I went to Overbrook, became their first intern. I interned there my junior and senior year. And then, but while I was interning in the film department. And so they did allow me to, basically have the role of like a young development executive. And so I actually had, projects I was working on and helping the other executives with their notes.
Invaluable.
Reading scripts and evaluating writers, and even had a project that I put together with the writer that we took into Universal. We took it into Scott Stuber at the time when he and Mary Parent were running Universal, and pitched it to him, and he liked it. We ultimately didn't do it, but he liked it. And I was like, wow, I'm still in school and getting the opportunity to really see how this is done. So I got that opportunity to function that way, but it was never like an official thing.
Also, having that imprimatur of Will Smith, you learn, gives you the entree into those meetings.
Yes.
And then the fact that you can then stand up and hold your head up and do a good job is just icing on the cake.
There you go.
It was a good lesson.
It was a fantastic lesson.
So you get into Overbrook when you graduate.
I became an assistant when I graduated.
Who did you assist?
James Lasseter. Yeah, I was his second
still
assistant.
Close with James?
Yeah, we're great.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
So James and you work together, and then you get promoted to what?
I didn't. I quit. So I was there for 2 years.
Because you weren't getting promoted.
Correct. So I was supposed to get promoted to become a junior executive, basically, in development. But that didn't happen. They were going through changes at the time and making some different moves with the film department, and brought in Teddy Z to run the film department. He was the one that was very instrumental in Hitch and produced Hitch, and then has gone on to produce great films.
Where do you go from there?
So I ended up quitting working for Will and James because I wanted more opportunity. And at that point in time, like, I'd interned for them in some capacity my entire college career, and then was an assistant for 2 years. And I figured, like, okay, there's no room for promotion. That's fine, but I got to go. So I ended up quitting, and then got offered a development executive job by Tracy Edmonds, who was a very prominent producer at the time. She did. Was
she still married to Babyface?
She was married to Babyface, yes.
So I worked on Soul Food. Did I meet you there at first?
No.
It was such a beautiful film about family.
Yeah.
George Tillman.
George Tillman. Yeah, definitely. That was his first.
Who was our guest.
And
listen to the George Tillman episode as well if you want to learn about that movie. So you worked for Tracy.
Yes, for just a year and a half. And then MGM at the time was looking for a young executive. And so I went in, I interviewed, and they hired me.
While you were working for Tracy?
Yes.
But you got the job with Tracy having quit and not having a job.
Correct. Yeah.
That takes a ball sack.
Yeah, I mean, but you got to believe in yourself. You got to bet on yourself.
100%.
I also believe you have to do a cost-benefit analysis of any job that you're in, right? So it's like, okay, let's say you want to get promoted or you want to advance. But let's say the benefit of being there is greater than the cost, meaning you're learning, even though you may not be where you want to be in the company, you're still learning, you're still growing, you're still getting opportunities that are contributing to your development. So that means the benefit is greater than the cost. The moment that you're at a place and that benefit stops and you're no longer growing and you're plateauing, then that means it's going to cost you more than the benefit. And that's when I think you should leave. And so for me, being at Overbrook was great, but then it started to cost me more because I plateaued. It's like there's no opportunity.
As an employer of 300 people, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
What do I as a boss do to alleviate that? Is there an interim step of remedy? For example, you're feeling like the cost benefit is not really working. Is it your responsibility to go to Tracy or whomever it is, James Lasseter before that, and say, look, I need to be promoted, or I need to.
Sure.
In other words, I always think it's a two-way street. Like, you can't always expect your bosses to be the mind readers.
Yes, this is true. And so in the case of Overbrook, I did that. Certainly explored
It sounds like you did that.
Yeah,
Did you do it with Tracy too?
Well, I didn't, because Tracy, I wasn't even looking to leave.
Oh, they
I
recruited
wasn't.
you.
Yeah, they recruited me.
And you
So
went to MGM.
I went to MGM. But going back to your point for a moment, it's twofold. So here's what I mean by that. You are CEO of a dynamic company, like you said, 300 employees. So let's just look at NBA, right? I love the NBA. And if you're a coach or you're an owner and you have your top players, while it is a two-way street, the onus is on management and that coach to make sure that those top players feel wanted, that they are considered, and that valued. And so that goes from the top down. If it's only on those top players to touch base with the coach and stuff, it may not go the way you want it to go. So in my experience, yes, of course, it's always a two-way street. And of course, if an employee is feeling certain things, take the initiative. But I also would challenge any CEO to make sure that you know the lifeblood of your company is the talent that's there. And for your overperformers, you need to make sure that they know that they're valued, they're wanted. You don't want them to go anywhere. And sometimes going above and beyond to make sure they feel great, because at the end of the day, if your top performers aren't there, the company may suffer. So, and I think sometimes in our business, there's not as much of a focus on like, oh, well, this person, no, they'll be okay. Well, no, if they're your top performer and you want to do business with them, as much as you want them to come to you, you go to them too.
That's a really good lesson. And I have to say, with humility, I appreciate it.
Amen.
Appreciate that advice and reinforcement. Let me go before our break, which I want to take in a moment because I want to get into some more meaty stuff.
Yeah.
You go from MGM and you get then recruited to Sony?
I got recruited from Tracy Edmonds to MGM. I was there for about 6 months, worked on Be Cool and Beauty Shop. And then 6 months in, they put the company up for sale.
Oh, right. Sony.
Yes. Sony was one of the investors
into
bought,
MGM.
Yes.
And so that gave you more of an entree into Sony.
Well, yes. So
they didn't absorb everyone.
They didn't absorb anyone. Everyone got let go from MGM, but then myself and Elizabeth Cantillon were the only two executives.
I just saw her because she's working on
the Alien,
producing Alien.
Yeah, Alien Romulus. Yeah.
You keep in touch with her a lot?
Oh, we just had lunch. Absolutely.
She's the best.
Absolutely. I've known her for 20 years.
So
like, love her dearly. One of my closest mentors and friends.
Isn't it wonderful that we have this business that we can talk like this about folks that literally we came up with?
Yes.
And have these long-standing relationships. I'm having lunch today with my dear friend Susan Kartsonis, who is an extraordinary producer. She was a studio executive at Fox for years.
Wow.
And we just became great friends. And it goes beyond the work relationship. It actually morphs into this friendship. And I love our business for that.
Oh, yeah. Me too. I
love our business for that. So Sony, you had some very successful years at Sony.
Yes.
Very successful.
Yes.
In fact, so wait, you started as a CE at Sony, and I think you ended up making it to like senior VP.
Yes.
In the course of how many years?
Oh, that took, let's see, I want to say that may have taken 7 years.
And you were like the highest ranking African-American studio executive at that time.
Yes.
Which is great and sad all
completely.
At once.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You know, was Kevin Jones there anymore?
No, this was after Kevin Jones.
Okay, because he was great.
I met him a couple times and just here he was, he had a phenomenal reputation and left a great legacy.
Have such a lack of really African-American executives in our business.
I know.
And it needs to really shift because we need all voices in the rooms. I mean, truly, in decision-making.
Absolutely.
Not just in junior or creative executives, but people that can actually green light.
That's right.
So you were fortunate enough, earned your stripes, to produce several movies. Can you name a few there?
Yes. So
when I say produce, oversee.
Yes, that's right. Because as an executive, I'm overseeing, whereas now I'm actually producing. So the first movie I worked on when I was at Sony was Pursuit of Happiness. And it was just ironic that I quit working for Will and James and then ultimately end up as a studio executive.
Intervention.
There you go. Divine intervention.
Come
there
on.
you go.
No, Devon intervention.
I like it. I'll take it.
So
we're going to coin that.
I have to say that's like so beautiful. Like, wow, that it came full circle like that.
It did.
Now they're probably saying, oh boy, did we F up. We let him go.
Maybe.
We let him walk out the door.
They may have.
And now he's controlling the purse string.
Well, not so much.
And that movie was very successful.
Oh, yeah. Pursuit of Happiness made almost as much domestically as Casino Royale did that year.
Isn't that something?
Isn't that amazing? I mean, when you think about
how Bond movie.
Yeah, this period
really
inspirational film just
incredible.
Yeah, to this day, it's probably one of the most beloved films that Will's
it
ever
also
done.
Speaks to Will's star power. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Okay, so Pursuit of Happiness is your first movie.
First movie that I worked on. And it was great because
you're a star.
Well, I don't know about that.
In the studio.
But the thing that was unique about that movie was, first of all, I'm from the Bay Area, and we shot a lot of the movie like right in the areas where I grew up and where I worked and for my high school job. And that was just awesome. And then when we saw the first cut of the film, I didn't know at that time that there was a differentiation between what creative execs did and what marketing execs did. So I had no idea. So I was like, hey, I love this movie. And I put together like this 40-page business plan. And I got it to Amy first, and she loved it. Got it to Michael Linton, got it to Will and James. And then it circulated to marketing because I didn't know to get it to them first. So then everybody's like, who's this exec that's doing a marketing plan? And da-da-da. So long story short, I was able to successfully execute on that plan and took Will across the country to different events in the faith-based space and worked on him doing these personalized greetings to the top churches in the top 10 to 12 markets, along with the faith-based trailer that we released to churches all across the country. And anyway, it was a massive success. And so that contribution to Pursuit of Happiness was really instrumental in its success. And so that was kind of the moment when folks were like, oh, wow, DeVon sees something and knows something that we don't know.
Using the power of the church.
Exactly.
Using the power of marketing.
Yes.
And combining those two.
Yes.
When we come back, I want to talk about how that evolved for you and how the faith-based movies that you've now become so sort of famous for and known for in our business have served you and so many of us. We'll be back in a moment.
Okay.
Get a glimpse into a secret part of Hollywood that few are aware of and that filmmakers rarely talk about. In the new book, Audienceology by Kevin Goetz. Each chapter is filled with never-before-revealed inside stories and interviews from famous studio chiefs, directors, producers, and movie stars, bringing the art and science of audienceology into focus. Audienceology, how moviegoers shape the films we love. From Tiller Press at Simon & Schuster. Available now.
We're back with DeVon Franklin. DeVon, before we go on to talk about faith-based films, I want to make a comment that Will Gluck, who directed Annie, was a guest on the podcast. And he talked about how he grew up on the streets where Annie was shot.
Wow.
And so he had the same sort of feeling of, I can't believe I'm back on these streets working on this movie. It was like an out-of-body experience. I guess you felt the same way when you did Pursuit of Happiness in Oakland.
Yes, in Oakland. Yeah, same experience. And that's actually ironic you mentioned it because I was one of the executives that worked on Annie.
That's why I'm bringing
that was
it
like
up
one
to
of
you.
my last films that I did at Sony before I started producing.
I did my research.
I know you did. You're the king of research. So
I knew that. Okay. I want to start with something that is a little bit different. I want to define a faith-based movie because I work on a lot of faith-based movies, but I also work on a lot of, I call faith-friendly movies.
Sure.
And I also work with a lot of folks who think they have a faith-based movie, who have a faith-friendly movie, and also people who think they have a faith-based movie who don't have a faith-based movie nor a faith-friendly movie. So first I want to talk about what is your definition of a faith-based film?
Wow. That's a great question. And I don't even know if I have a clear answer for it. It's kind of like...
Let's figure it out together.
It's one of those things that when I look at what it means is like the subject matter and the main character's through line is fundamentally rooted in a spiritual idea.
100%. I would also say, from people that I've spoken to, that it must be a hammer movie, meaning from the pulpit, you have to be able to slam down the gavel, the hammer, the gauntlet to say, using those words from that movie can help in your sermon. And if it doesn't have that quality, which is high bar, by the way, to be able to actually use that with your congregants, it's not faith-based. If it has good spiritual values, if it mentions God or the universe and is more spiritual than, say, religious, it's usually more faith-friendly. Do you subscribe to that?
I think yes, and I think it depends on, again, who the movie is for. So if we're talking about a traditional faith-based movie that Hollywood has come to understand and recognize, that traditionally means, a Christian faith-based movie.
Oh, let's even go further than that, because even that I have issue with, because in a way, it's almost like the moniker that we put in Hollywood on urban movies.
Right.
Urban movies mean black movies.
Right.
Or multicultural movies mean Hispanic, Latinx movies. And they actually mean much more than that, but that's the pigeonholing, I think, that takes place. Faith-based movies really mean evangelical Christian movies. Is that true?
I think that is the understanding of it.
That's right.
But I also know that having done a lot of films in the space that appeal to different segments of the space, that the space is far bigger than just a white Christian evangelical audience. There are Latino segments of that audience. There are black segments of that audience.
But are they all evangelicals?
Some,
well, I guess let's talk about Miracles. Let's talk about Miracles from Heaven. I tested that movie in Arizona, if you remember that screening.
Yeah, we had such a good screening.
We had 2 screenings.
Yeah.
We had one really good screening.
Yeah.
We had one that was okay. If you remember, and you've given me permission to talk about this.
Of course.
So in one screening, it's faith-based level of intensity of how they consider self-identification of faith-based, and also church avidity. How often do you go to church? And also their level of how they call themselves religious or semi-religious or not religious at all. And we put the non-religious at all and somewhat religious in one theater.
Yes, right.
And we put people who went to church every now and again in that same theater.
Wasn't the same?
Yeah.
Oh,
what we put in the other theater that did really well were people who were either very religious and were also going to church at least once a week. And there was a 20 to 30 point difference.
Yes, for those that did not identify as faith, they were like, no.
Correct.
But those that did, they were like, yes.
Correct.
Got it. Yes, I remember this.
So that is, to me, very much in line with what you said before about the intrinsic or DNA of the property, having a more religious than actually spiritual feeling about it, or based in religion. The other thing that I find very interesting about faith-based movies is, have we ever really found a movie that appeals to Muslims, Jews, Catholics, evangelicals, that we call faith-based? I don't believe so.
I mean, listen, I don't know.
Isn't that interesting, though?
It is interesting. I mean, the only movie that comes to mind, but I don't know the demographics of that success of that film, is The Passion of the Christ. That film is the biggest, quote unquote, faith-based film.
Well, Jews weren't running to that film.
This is true. But other demographics, it's possible, So
I'm saying, and I don't think Muslims were either. I think that was a Catholic-driven and Christian-driven. And I'm not even sure evangelicals.
Yeah, that I don't know.
But you're very right about that. That was a massive success. By the way, I was one of those folks who, when Mel was getting lambasted for his interpretation, I was like, it's his interpretation. He is an artist. We have to allow artists to be artists. And it wasn't the most popular
position, I'm sure.
Position to take, but I really felt that. But this notion of helping young filmmakers determine if they have the goods or not, and they come to you with a property, What do you look at? What touches you? How do you determine whether it's faith-based or not? Because you'd be one of the experts I'd call. I'm
Right.
serious. I get a movie and I'm uncertain whether it can make it or not. I usually have a few people that I call. Jonathan Bach is one.
Oh, yeah.
I have a group of folks who I will call and ask their opinions. You would be one of them. What would be your criteria?
Two things. One, does it touch me personally? Is this story, as a man of God, a person of faith, is this story affecting my faith? Is it touching my faith? Is it inspiring my faith, strengthening my faith? That's first where it starts. Just my own personal, like, oh yeah, I'm a person of faith and this really is helping me. And then the second thing is marketability. Can I actually take this message, take this story and market it to an audience that I believe will want it? And so sometimes I might find a story that I connect to as a person of faith, but then I don't think I can sell it. So I don't do it. And there are some other stories that I don't connect to that I think, oh man, this is probably very marketable, but it's not for me.
What's an example of one that really worked? I mean, the one behind you comes to mind for me, which is Miracles from Heaven.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Why did that work so well?
I think it worked for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, it's a great story. It's a great, miraculous, true story about a young girl who had an incurable stomach condition and fell down the inside of a hollow tree, hit her head 3 times, talked about the experience she had in heaven, and came out of the tree healed. And from that day to this, she's been healed. And so that story and the supernatural nature of it, I think, just strikes a chord. But then also getting Jennifer Garner at the moment we got her. It's like she was doing things in TV, but her movie career, I don't think she had been in a movie in a while. She was navigating the divorce of the Ben Affleck marriage. And so we got her at a moment when there was so much goodwill, and there still is, but at that time, it was like the apex of goodwill, and people were rooting for her and wanting to be supportive of her. And she just played that role of a mother and understanding what that meant to fight for her child in a way that transcended just an actress playing a role. When you watch that movie, she is just, I think it's one of her best performances.
Oh, she's wonderful. Do you remember, by the way, another faith-based movie, Heaven is for Real?
Yes.
Where there was a major change made in the faith-based audience cut because, well, now I'll say the word and see if you remember the story, angels.
Of course I remember.
Tell me what happened.
So in Heaven is for Real, which was
you were an executive on that.
I was the executive that oversaw that and championed that. And our director wanted to put this scene in there where there were these actual angels inside of the church. And it was one of those interesting, I mean, he did ultimately a brilliant job, but from like the moment that he put it in the script to shooting it to then testing it, I was always saying, no, this is not going to work. No, we can't see literal angels. Like, let's leave it to the imagination so that audiences can have their own creation in their head of what an angel looks like instead of like making it a literal thing. But when you are in this business, I think when a filmmaker has a vision and a passion, try it. And then let's leave it up to the audience to say, hey, does this work or not?
They just rejected.
Completely. They love the movie, but they rejected that.
They loved the movie. And because that was such a standout, because we, as, I don't care if we're religious or not, have an idea of what an angel looks like.
That's right. And when you start
that
making
celestial,
it literal,
right? That,
oh man, forget about it.
No, they wanted it literal. They didn't want it
to
be kind of more supernaturally or something. What it was?
Well, no, what it was we originally had angels that took human form inside the church,
right?
That were kind of dressed in this Roman kind of gear, and they were like, no, we don't want that. We'll take the ones that kind of look like lights in the sky.
We want the halos,
but we don't want that. We don't want the literal like, oh wait, they look like this. Like no, like people, like no, they don't want that. So we ended up.
They want their perception.
That's right. So we ended up taking that whole scene out. And then what we replaced it with was much more impressionistic. And that worked. I mean, that movie made $100 million,
it's unbelievable.
Worldwide. And is still to this day one of the most successful faith-based movies.
What other faith-based films are you proud of? Flamin Hot had a kind of a spiritual, but it wasn't faith-based. I would call that a faith-friendly movie.
Faith-friendly. I would say that. Absolutely.
And how did it come to be? Did you find Eva Longoria? Did Eva find you?
I found Eva. I found the story.
What made you go to Eva Longoria for that story?
Because I commit to the process. And what I mean by that's something that I learned from working with Will Smith, not only as an intern and an assistant, but as a studio executive working on so many of his movies. He was very much about the process. Like, let's not let ego stand in the way of telling the best stories. So if we have a process that all ideas are welcome, the best idea wins, the best director wins. Like if we have that process, the process is going to lead us to success. So with Flamin Hot, I found that story. I met with the real guy. His name is Richard Montañez and his wife, Judy Montañez. And he was telling me about his story of starting as a janitor, working for Frito-Lay and coming up with this idea to put chili powder on a Cheeto and market it to the Latino community in Southern California. And that just blew up and catapulted him from being the janitor and becoming one of the top executives in the company. And when I found that idea, I sold it to Searchlight, Fox Searchlight at the time, and worked on the script and developed it. And then we got to the place where we were putting a director on. I sent it out, probably about 15 different directors. 12 of them wanted to meet. And so I committed to the process. I met with every single director. And one of the directors that wanted to come in to meet was Eva Longoria. I knew her agent very well. I didn't know Eva. And so when her agent called me, I was like, well, is she a director? And they said, well, she's directed a lot of TV. But I was like, well, has she directed a movie? And they were like, no, not yet. And so I was like, well, I don't know. But because I was friends with her agent, I said, okay, I know how this goes. Took the meeting. Eva came in and I didn't know she had a master's in Chicano studies and went through every page of the script and was telling me what I did right and where I needed to improve and what was authentic and what wasn't authentic. And by the end of that meeting, I was like, wow, I had no idea that she was such a force and that she understood what this movie needed to be. So
wow.
From that moment, I was like, she's our director.
And boy, did she do an outstanding
she
job.
did a
And the
brilliant job.
scores on that movie. I want to ask you about projects that you're working on now that are exciting to you, that really speak to you.
Yeah, I'm working on my next two movies, which I'm close to going into production. One is a film, faith-based movie for Amazon called Relationship Goals. And
Relationship Goals?
Yes, Relationship
Goals. That's a terrible title.
Well, it's not if you know what it means from a social media standpoint.
Sorry. That's my relationship with DeVon.
Yeah, so if you go on to Instagram and you do hashtag, you look up hashtag
wait, I
relationship
said
goals.
this at lunch to you. Sorry.
Yes.
And you said, oh, well, wait, you need to.
Yeah.
I have to confess.
So the core that knows what it is, they're like, we know exactly what that is. Because
but what
that's
about
like,
the core that don't?
That's okay. You'll find it once that core that does makes it a success.
Okay, so tell me why it's a good title again. Tell me why it's
Because in the culture, everybody knows what that is. It's like, oh yeah, this couple is relationship goals, or yeah, we want to be relationship goals. So it's a euphemism that folks
like
in
Netflix
pop
and chill.
culture. There you go. They know what that means.
Yeah,
so years ago,
hold on, I'm looking at our engineer Gary. Did you know what that meant?
because maybe y'all are not in the demo.
Touche. So you were going to say.
So a few years ago, a pastor friend of mine, his name is Mike Todd. He pastors a church in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
He had done a YouTube series called Relationship Goals that went viral. And then he wrote a book based on that YouTube series called Relationship Goals that became a New York Times bestseller. It was on the list for 15 weeks.
What the hell do I know?
I'm just telling you.
What do I know?
And it was, in terms of relationship books, it was the most successful relationship book, especially for the urban
You mean like
faith community.
like Chicken Soup for the Soul or something?
Well, like Think Like a Man, Steve Harvey's book.
Listen, you are one of those rare breeds of producer who really understands marketing. So I have an extra added respect for you because of that,
Thank you.
which means you have a true appreciation for your audience.
Absolutely.
And you know that I call myself an audience advocate.
Yes.
And essentially that's what I do. I put the audience's voice ahead of others when they don't have a voice.
Right.
And so knowing that information is very helpful for me to hear.
Oh, yeah. And also, I think why this particular book, Relationship Goals, struck such a chord is because it really does talk about how to have a healthy love life and what goes into it. And Pastor Todd uses his relationship with his wife and talks about their story. And it just struck a really strong chord. So I set that up at Amazon years ago, been developing the script. Linda Mendoza is now going to direct it. She comes from the world of comedy. She's done a lot of episodic television. She did a movie years ago called Chasing Poppy. But since then,
I worked on that.
Yeah. She did that movie, which is a great
Sofia
film.
Vergara was in that.
There you go. Yep.
That movie was fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun. But since then, she's like one of the most in-demand directors when it comes to comedy on TV. And so she's going to direct it, and we're up for green light at Amazon, and we'll make that in Toronto. Very, very excited about that film.
Great. What else is on the agenda?
And then I'm doing a film. Tyler Perry and I just partnered up to do
Tell me about that, for God's sake. That's fabulous.
Yeah, we just formed a partnership to produce faith-based movies for Netflix.
So you have a deal.
We have a deal, yes.
And what does that deal look like? Like, how many movies do you have to give them a year?
We have to get, it's kind of like one a year at a minimum 3 over the 4-year term, and then it can be more than that. And so the first one that we're doing is called R&B. It's based upon the Bible story of the love story of Ruth and Boaz. And so we're doing an update of that love story, and we're calling it R&B. So that is a movie that I love because I've never had the opportunity to do a Bible story in kind of a modern way. And I think it'll appeal to his audience and my audience, and we're really excited about that. So
is his audience different than your audience?
His audience is a little bit different because my audience, in terms of the films that I've done, are used to content that I would say fits more squarely in the faith-based box, whereas some of Tyler's content fits there, but then other content was just different segments of
the Medea thing is very much older Black women
who
are really committed. Sure. By the way, a completely misunderstood segment of the power of the wallet.
I know.
I'm just saying.
I know.
I know it. I know it all too well for so many reasons on so many films.
Yeah, totally.
Look at Woman King.
Yeah.
Look at Color Purple.
Mm-hmm.
Driven by a majority of tickets sold to African-American women, particularly over the age of 35.
Yeah.
Very strong.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Tyler, tell us about him and how did you all hook up together?
Yeah, it was very organic. I've known Tyler. We've been friends for, over 15 years. And I did an animated faith-based film for Sony called The Star years ago. And it was
I worked on that.
Yes. It was a nativity story, but from the animals.
Tyler was involved?
Yeah, he played a voice. He was one of the camels.
Oh.
Yeah, Oprah did a voice for me. She was one of the camels. Kelly Clarkson, Zachary Levi, Mariah Carey did the lead song. We had like an all-star cast that came together for that. And so that's the only time we've ever worked together. And over the years, we've talked about different things. And then last summer, I was in a conversation with Scott Stuber and Netflix. And then Tyler got wind of it and called me. I was like, hey, man, let's do this together.
Wow.
And I was like,
what he has done for the city of Atlanta, I just want to say.
It's unbelievable.
I've never met Tyler.
What?
Yeah.
How's that possible?
I know. I'm going to ask you to introduce us because I think we would really get on like a house on fire.
Yes, you would. Knowing both of you, I think you really would.
The Star, I want to just say, was not successful.
No.
And I have a theory, and I'd like to hear your theory.
Yeah.
You want to hear mine first?
I want yours first, absolutely.
Mine is that it's primarily a Catholic story and not an evangelical story. Mm-hmm. So as a faith-based movie that was dealing with primarily Catholic population was much more limited in its scope. Tell me if that's right or wrong.
Maybe. I mean, but everyone, even if you're not Catholic, you still buy into the birth of Jesus and the nativity. It may not be as much of the lore, because when you're talking about Catholic, you're talking about the Virgin Mary and that, being such a prominent part of Catholicism. But I think what happened, 2 things happened. Well, actually, 3 things happened. One, to my knowledge, there's never been a mainstream faith-based animated movie that's been released by a major studio.
Yeah.
The first time you're doing anything, it takes time for the audience to then say, oh, we're building our audience so that there's faith-based animation that's going out that people know and that they are expecting. So it was the first time that was done. That was the first thing. Second thing is that because it's a faith-based movie, we made the movie for a price. It was not nearly as expensive as most animated films. And then because we made it for a price, the marketing spend was also congruent with the price. When you look at animated films and what is spent to make those films successful,
2 years in advance
there you go. I mean, it's tens and tens of millions of dollars, which we did not have at our disposal. And then coming out at a holiday time, Sony also had the release, I believe it was, of the Jumanji sequel that came out right after us. So from a company standpoint, I think Rothman would even say this, like the Star tested, people liked it, he loved it, we had all the goods. But the studio's like, look, we're going to give this a few weeks, but then we got to pivot.
Well, I also have to tell you that it wasn't a hell of a lot of fun. Like kids.
Yes, that's true too.
It was more medicinal. It was like
a Sunday school lesson.
It was like a Sunday school lesson. And kids want to laugh.
Yes.
Hysterically.
And it played young. That's what we found out. It played very young.
So it became, in some odd way, a feathered fish, didn't it?
There you go. Yeah, I agree with that.
And yet, well-intended, well executed, a lot of talent surrounding that. So it was very interesting. I'm glad we actually brought that up because
Me too.
This program should not only be about praising this and doing that, but also seeing what really had great intentions and going out with a great idea, but just didn't sort of work in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's right. I do.
Because God knows you've had so many successes. So many successes.
Yes.
DeVon Franklin, I don't know what to say except thank you. You're just a terrific friend, and I am very blessed to have you in my life. And thank you for sharing your journey and many of these stories.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for who you are and everything you do for us. So grateful to be here. Truly an honor.
To our listeners, I hope you enjoyed our interview. I encourage you to follow DeVon on his social media at DeVon Franklin and to check out his films, shows, and books. For more filmmaking and audience testing stories, I invite you to check out my book, Audienceology, at Amazon or through my website at kevingetz360.com. And please also follow me on my social media. Next time on Don't Kill the Messenger, I'll welcome a terrific directing, producing, and writing duo, Will Speck and Josh Gordon. Until then, I'm Kevin Getz, and to you, our listeners, I appreciate you being part of the movie-making process. Your opinions matter.